Now entering Nerdist.com.
Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. And water can flow, or it can crash.
Welcome to the Bruce Lee Podcast, a podcast about Bruce Lee's life and philosophy.
Be water, my friend.
Hi, everybody. This is Shannon Lee.
And this is Sharon Lee.
And welcome to the Bruce Lee Podcast.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, everybody. So we have a little bit of a different episode today.
Special episode.
Special. For today's episode, we thought we would spend our time talking about my brother, Brandon.
Brandon Lee.
Brandon Bruce Lee. Yes, that was his full name. Coming up this year, 2018, end of March, is the 25th anniversary of Brandon's passing. And I can't believe it's been 25 years.
I know, wow.
I don't seem old enough for that to have happened. But that is where we're at. And it just occurred to me as I was thinking about that, and his birthday, by the way, was just in February. He has the same birthday as Sharon. February 1st.
We're spiritually related.
Yes. And I was thinking, gosh, we have not done an episode where we just talked about Brandon.
Yeah, and there's lots of Brandon fans out there.
There are.
And we wanted to show some love for all you Brandon fans. And also, I mean, he was your father's firstborn son and
yes,
such an integral part of your family. And this is about family and family practice. And it'd be really nice to just kind of hear some stories about Brandon.
Yeah. My father was so proud, as you can imagine, to have a son, his firstborn be a son. And, you know, when Brandon was born, he was born with like super crazy Asian black hair. The super, you know, head
like
of black hair. Yeah. And it all fell out. And he was totally bald. And when it came back in, it was blonde.
Oh,
he couldn't
make
out his mind which genes they were going with there. But then he kept that blonde hair, and it just gradually darkened as he got older. His hair kind of did the same thing that my hair did, which is it just got progressively darker, and it went from super, super straight to wavy. So there you have it.
There you have it. The hair story.
The hair story.
So for some of the people who might not know about Brandon, why don't you just give us a little, just, you know, information and background about who Brandon was?
Gosh. So Brandon was just this, you know, he had a lot of the same characteristics of my father. I always remarked, like when I would see him in movies, how he moved a lot like him. He was extremely physically coordinated. Like, I remember he wanted to be able to do a backflip, standing backflip. And so he just did it. He just like went out onto the grass, tried, and the first time kind of, you know, under rotated and fell forward a little bit, and then the next time he did it. And then that was how my father was. Like you could show them how to do something once, and then like by the second or third time they could do it better than you could do it.
Yeah, it's those like physical geniuses, right?
Yeah, totally.
That would not be me, but
but you know, he loved his father so much. It was really hard for him when our dad died. He was 8. And so he was just right in that, you know, little boy sweet spot. And when our dad died, he didn't speak for a while. But, you know, we had a very special relationship in that I think he really saw himself. I know that he really saw himself as my protector. And I remember right after my father died, when, you know, after the funeral and all that, and my mom had to go back to Hong Kong to sort of, figure out what to do with all our stuff and all of that. And so we went to stay for several weeks with my aunt and uncle who lived in Canada. They lived in Calgary. And so we stayed with them for a few weeks while my mom went back to Hong Kong. And I had this blankie that I used to carry with me everywhere, and I sucked it wasn't my thumb, it was my fingers, but you get the picture. And at that point in time, for whatever reason, my aunt decided that it was time for me to stop using a blankie. Right after my father died. I'm just going to say it's probably not good timing.
Yeah.
But, whatever. It was the 70s. It was the thought of the time. And Brandon just stood up for me. So he put his hands on his hips and was yelling at our aunt. He's 8 years old. You know what I mean? Give her blankie back.
Oh.
Yeah, and that theme just continued throughout our lives. He was the typical big brother in the sense that he loved to torture me and prank me and fight with me and do all sorts of things. But there were instances when he would really come to my rescue. If he thought that I was really in trouble or had really hurt myself or that someone was picking on me or anything like that. Even he got a little carried away with it, I have to say. When I was in my 20s, he would tell his friends who were just 4 years older than me, one of his friends started talking about some explicit conversation having to do with some sexual something or other. And apparently his girlfriend told me later that after I left the room, he yelled at his friend, "Don't talk about that kind of stuff in front of my sister." I was 22 at the time.
Wow. So he kind of took a little bit of the fatherly role.
He did. I think he always felt like he needed to, to a certain extent. Even to the point of really sitting me down and having conversations with me. Right before I was going into high school, he sort of sat me down and had this is what you'll encounter in high school conversation. And then when I was going to college, and, Brandon only went to one semester of college, and then he dropped out because he always knew from the time he was a little kid that what he really wanted to do was act. And he went to college at Emerson College in Boston for one semester and spent most of his free time traveling down to New York. And then he just said, I know what I want to do, so I'm not going to do this. But when it was time for me to go to college, I was a little different. I was not so driven. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was no idea what I wanted to study in college or anything. And I showed up there, and I remember talking to him and him saying and telling him, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to be studying. And he just said, just pick classes that are interesting to you, try them out. And if you really like one, then take another one in that field and take another until you figure it out. And which is very Bruce Lee philosophy, right? Just follow your passion and your joy. And that's how I ended up majoring in music. So he was also good that way. He would step in with the advice from time to time in between the torturings. But he was this larger than life character, or I should say soul. He, first of all, he loved to read. He was a voracious reader, and he would have a dictionary with him so that when he was reading, whenever he came across a word he didn't know, he would look it up.
Wow.
And because of that, he knew the definition of everything. I remember when I was in junior high and high school, and I would say, "Hey, Brandon, what does such and such mean?" And he would be able to give me the dictionary definition of it.
He memorized the dictionary.
Yeah, he got a perfect score on the English portion of his SATs.
Wow.
Actually. So he was extremely literary. And His favorite book was The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Zen and
the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? And he was super sharp, super smart, and super theatrical. Like, he loved to tell a story and spin a yarn and sort of capture the attention of the room. And when we were kids, he had this fort that he had built in the backyard out of plywood with a padlock on it and the whole nine so that Mom would stay out. And my mom was walking by one day and she heard meowing in the fort. So, of course, she had a key because she made Brandon give her a key also. And she went in there and she found this little tiny kitten in his fort. And Brandon came home from school and she said, what are you doing with a kitten in your fort? And he said, oh, my God, Mom, you're never going to believe this. I was walking home from school because we used to walk to school. And I found this kitten and it was like near death. It was in the gutter. It was all dirty. It had ants crawling on it. I didn't know if it was going to live. So I brought it home and I just cleaned it up and I was just keeping it in my fort. I honestly, I had no idea if it was going to live or not. But I think he's going to make it. He looks like he's okay. And my mom is like, her heartstrings are being tugged. She's like, oh my God. That is such an incredible, you nourished this kitten. Oh my, Brandon, you're so amazing. And then we named the kitten Samson because he had the strength of Samson or rose from near death, right? Come to find out a few years later that his friend's cat just had kittens and he just brought it home.
Stone cold hustler.
But he could just sell it, just sell the emotion. He painted all of the nuances and, details to just make you fall hook, line, and sinker for that whole thing.
Too late by the time your mom figured it out, right?
Yeah. No. I don't know that she ever figured it out. I think he just finally told her. 'Cause at that point, we'd had the cat for several years and it was definitely not going anywhere. But he always knew that he wanted to be an actor. In school, he would put on his own plays. I remember he copied down word for word a few episodes of The Twilight Zone and then stage directed them at school. I can't remember which episodes he did. I'd have to look back and see.
Well, and I imagine that, he must have really had a passion because it's pretty daunting being the son of Bruce Lee and then also thinking about going into the same business as your larger than life dad, right?
Yes. Well, but in a way I think he thought of himself as different because my father's passion was martial arts. But Brandon's passion was acting. He was the artist through and through, he was really into the creative process and he loved to write. I think that he was always sort of hatching, not that my father wasn't also, but a lot of my father's stories, all of my father's stories were vehicles for the conveyance of his love of martial arts. Whereas for Brandon, it was much more literary and dramatic and character exploration and that kind of thing. And when he dropped out of college, my mom was like, fine, if you're going to drop out of college to pursue this, then you're going to do it on your own, essentially. And so for a while, he lived in like this little tiny rundown apartment and just did plays, with friends around town, got into theater groups, did acting, until he could sort of get going. And I think the most challenging thing for him as an actor was that because he was Bruce Lee's son, it was wanted that he do martial arts and do action films. And so on the one hand, he was able to get a foothold into the business much more easily because of that, but in this particular lane.
Yeah, they already had him pigeonholed before he got to show up as who he was.
Right.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is neither he or I studied any martial arts after our father died. He did not as a kid. Even though he was super athletic, he did other things. And he wasn't even really a big athlete. Like, I was an athlete in high school. I played 3 different varsity sports. I think he may have been on maybe the football team once or the soccer team or something like that, but he was not a big athlete. He was an actor. Like, that's what he wanted to do. He was a thespian. And he did come around to martial arts eventually, probably around the time he was about 19 or so. And because he was, you know, physically coordinated and athletically gifted, he picked it up really, really quickly. But he didn't study prior to that, in particular because, I mean, I think with both he and I, when we came around to the study of martial arts, eventually, we both really enjoyed it. We both really liked it, but it wasn't our life, you know. And even though he studied at the Inosanto Academy with Dan Inosanto, and he was very good, and he got some sort of facility with Muay Thai and JKD and all of that, you know, it was more an exploration for him. And also because he was being asked to do these action roles as well, which came naturally to him, but which were not initially a thing for him, you know? And so that was always a really big struggle. And I know when he made his movie in Hong Kong, Legacy of Rage, it was I know I heard a lot of stories about how he was a little difficult. I think he was young and he was really trying to be a real, you know,
real actor. And he was doing essentially this, you know, I did one too, by the way, like knockoff action movie in the legacy of our father. And it was not a great feeling, you know? Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of lesson you learn by going through it. Because when you're young and somebody offers you a movie and you want to be an actor, you kind of say yes, right?
Well, right. And in fact, he also did, the very first job that he ever did was in the Kung Fu with David Carradine. He did a TV movie with David Carradine in the Kung Fu genre. I can't remember what the name of the movie was, but and where he shaved his head and was a, you know,
grasshopper type.
Yes. I mean, it was literally Kung Fu, like it was whatever, Kung Fu the movie or whatever. And you know, I think going back, that's not really, if he could have his dream, that's not how he would have started.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is that, you know, this is typical of the child of a major celebrity, and especially if you're going into the same business and you kind of look like him, and then, you know, it's such a big shadow that is cast over you. But, you know, I look at pictures of Brandon and seen his films and stuff, and it's like he's such a different person. Like he is this very bohemian, romantic, artistic, thespian, like such a different energy. I mean, just as charismatic, but completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And I like that you use the word romantic, because he had a romanticism about him. He really, you know, I have some very limited amount of journal entries from him and letters that he wrote and things like that. And I remember reading them and thinking like, wow, he's almost got like a old time, like days of yore way of writing and relating.
Yeah, I could so easily, I mean, you're going to read some of these passages, but I could so easily envision him in like kind of a, you know, like a flowery, like a white billowy pirate shirt with like a fencing, you know, like a swashbuckler, a musketeer, or a Scarlet Pimpernel, or somebody who's like kind of dashing and grand and romantic, and, you know, like, but also kind of fun.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, fun definitely epitomized him as well. He loved to play jokes, and he had this big boisterous laugh and huge smile, and he was a daredevil through and through. Like, he used to skateboard, and I think he was constantly he used to skateboard and ski, and he was constantly breaking bones and getting stitches. He knocked himself unconscious a couple times. Like, he was that guy. My mom literally has had passed the ambulance leaving her house on her way home. Like he was always building like these rickety skate ramps in the backyard and then like landing on his head and knocking himself out, that kind of stuff.
But also he, like, part of his meditative practice was a lot of these solo trips that he would go into the woods, into
Yes.
nature. He had like a love affair with nature, right?
He did. My mom, one of the things she did with us when we were kids is camp. So from a young age, she used to take us camping with these different companies that would put on these camping trips. And it became a big love for Brandon. And, you know, when he was an adult and out of high school, I mean, he camped all through high school. He would go on these organized camping trips with these different groups. He did Outward Bound, which is super hardcore camping. I've done an Outward Bound trip before as well. And so, and he could, you know, read a topographical map and use a compass and all that kind of stuff. And when he was older, he was super into motorcycles. So he had a Harley and he would go solo camping out in the woods.
Yeah, I think these are the stories that kind of put together this character of this kind of romantic, you know, character, writer, artist, seeking solace in the wilderness kind of vibe that I get from him.
Yeah, and in addition to all that, he was also very much a seeker, you know, which is, I think, characteristic of us Lees.
It's in your DNA.
It's in our DNA. And so I brought along these journal entries from one of his solo camping trips that I have, because I think it's such a nice window into, first of all, his love of nature, the way he expresses himself, the way he writes, and also his sort of philosophical viewpoint on the world and his ability through this sort of seeker quality that he has to be constantly trying to sort of glean something from life and his experience. And so he went on this, I'm not 100% sure. I want to say he was probably around 19 or 20 when he went on this camping trip. I remember him telling me about it. And, you know, so he went camping, he rode up with some friends, and then he went off on his own and he set off into the wilderness, and he ended up in this meadow when a rainstorm hit. And he had this tent and he threw it up, but it was like super old and it had holes in it. And so it was like waterlogged and leaking and barely keeping him protected. And he wrote some journal entries. And so he writes, Day 5. I'm depressed again. This trip, which was supposed to save me, is failing. I am having extremely fatalistic feelings. I'm in the woods now, alone. Right now I wish I had some other people around. This small blue tent has become a prison of sorts. Outside it's raining, and if it rains much harder, I am going to die. Literally, I am far from help, and it is cold and wet. Never have I been alone for this long. The tent is sagging around me, and a flood of water is rushing into the meadow. I want to go home. If the weather doesn't improve tomorrow, I may snap. Dun, dun, dun.
Very dramatic.
Very dramatic, as you can imagine. Day 6. Aha! I have it figured out. The day began with rain. There was a brief period of sunshine, which induced me to begin packing up. I was in high spirits. But then the crafty rain caught me just as I was taking the tent down and utterly soaked both it and me. I set the tent and huddled within. This brief period while I sat in a waterlogged tent, which bore a new rip made by my careless step, was, in a sense, my catharsis. I was truly fearful, with that gut fear one may experience after losing large sums of someone else's money. But I do not believe I was fearful for my life. No, I was fearful for my ego, for my comfort. The rain eventually stopped, and the sun actually shone intermittently. With a zeal born of fear, I rushed forth, took down the dilapidated tent, packed my bags, and set off at what can only be described as a dead run. The meadow had seemed to have acquired evil, bad karma. He sets off through, on his way, And he says, through some sort of grace, the good karma of affirmative action, it did not rain again. In fact, I had the distinct impression that I was the storm front, for the small patch of blue sky through which the sun peeked occasionally seemed to center itself directly above my head and follow me as I walked. I made it to China Camp without further ado, whereupon, being a man of extreme good taste, I moved into the men's bathroom, where I am at present, and where I expect to remain. The weather is a great gumption effector, and I hope I did not carve "I'm happy" on the bathroom door ephemerally. I am no longer alone, for I have as company now myself. After you have been away from other people long enough, there is nothing to do but be with yourself. Your ego, which operates solely for others, is gone. Hopefully I will make it to a town tomorrow where it is my fervent desire to check into a hotel. This tent has had it anyway. An interesting note, my flashlight batteries just died very slowly. Good thing I have more. I am happy.
Wow. It's hard to believe this language is coming from a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could also see so much of your father's philosophy like peppered through here, but kind of being expressed in his very own way.
Yeah, yeah. And you can see he has that dramatic flair and that sort of literary sense of description and set and setting and the emotional quality of everything he's going through, and very real, by the way, like very honest with how he's feeling and the depth of what he's feeling. Yeah, no, I just thought it was beautiful, and it does show like my father's influence, but also who he is separate and apart. So
yeah, it's such a beautiful example of that it's he's not mimicking your dad's philosophy. He has integrated it in the way that, a young man can without fully experiencing the world yet. And yet, like, such a clear resonance of his own voice, his own soul starting to kind of shine through these words. And even the practice of journaling, it seemed like, I don't know if that's something that your dad taught you guys, but like,
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember reading, I have a handful of journal entries of his from when he's in high school. He's on some kind of class trip where they went overseas. I guess it was some special thing you could sign up for, and they were in Scotland with a small group. I think it was like a literary trip, because he was with like his English teacher and stuff. And he talks about how he's keeping a journal, but how this is a new experience for him, and he's kind of skeptical about the notion of keeping a journal. But he went on throughout his whole life to be very much of a journal keeper and, a describer of his experience and a cataloger of his experience as well. But he always had just a real grasp for this sort of thing. I jotted down an excerpt from his 8th grade graduation speech that he wrote. He didn't actually speak at 8th grade graduation, but he was, as an exercise by his teacher, which is a teacher I also had later, we all had to write 8th grade graduation speech as if we had to speak, what would we say? And I just grabbed this because, remember, he's in 8th grade, so he's 14, right? And he writes, "To me, my educational career thus far seems to resemble, in a way, the myth of Sisyphus, who was forever condemned to push a boulder up a steep hill in Hades, but ere he reached the top, the boulder would slip from his grasp. The more we learn, the more we are forced to realize we do not know. As Socrates said, I am the smartest man in all Athens because I know how ignorant I am." I'm like, wow, okay.
I mean, clearly he wasn't having a fun time at school in the 8th grade.
Well, but that's the thing. Like, he just was so, I know I keep using this word, but just so literary, like, and learned about, all of these sorts of things. And he loved to write. So
Yeah, these are the words that, your typical 13, 14-year-old boy from Southern California is
Yeah,
really
no.
he's yeah, he feels a little like time warpy here, like he's, from some other time.
No, totally. And I'll tell you, in the journal entries from high school that I was telling you about when he's on this trip, he's talking about this girl that he kind of likes in the group. And I swear it's like I'm reading the diary of like an 18th century gentleman caller. I'm sort of like, wow.
So, he was trying to be an actor in the space that, your dad was such a, had a big influence. Did he have thoughts about being Bruce Lee's son, and did he struggle with his identity a bit?
He definitely did. It was hard, he, at one point, he went through different iterations of it. He understood that being Bruce Lee's son helped him to get access that he wouldn't have been able to get as easily in terms of meetings and that sort of thing. It did, however, pigeonhole him in a genre that, while he enjoyed it and took it on wholeheartedly, ultimately, was not where he wanted his career to be. He was using the action genre to be able to hopefully get him to a place where he could do dramatic roles. He was up for a number of movies like Say Anything and kind of stuff, ultimately. And I think that when he got The Crow, he was really excited because it was, even though it had some action to it, it was a different type of genre film, and one that was very dramatic. I mean, the main character is this very tortured soul. And one of the reasons that that film was so successful for him is because his portrayal of that character was really engaging and he really brought about this very romantic and sort of gripping, emotionally gripping and deep portrayal of that character, which is what he really wanted to do. But he went through anger around it and acting out around being Bruce Lee's son, and, as you would.
Yeah, that's totally normal. But it seemed it seemed to me that he was processing it, and yet because he was such a kind of positive and kind of sun-facing energy, that even as he was processing it, he was... he knew where he was going. Like, he had total confidence in himself, right?
Yeah, he had confidence in himself. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew that obviously he was Bruce Lee's son, but he wasn't relying on that in any way. And he really wanted to sort of just be his own person, which he did establish actually in the short time that he, and the very few projects that he did. He was starting to establish himself as Brandon Lee, and people were recognizing him as Brandon Lee out, and he was kind of coming out of the shadow of his father. And I have this short journal entry that he wrote where he's saying, "Yes, I think that I could share the fact that I am Bruce Lee's son with someone else. It is a fact that it is both a burden and a blessing. Which one it is will be determined in years to come, when I intend to share it with the whole world."
So, from that, he's so clear that he's going to have a certain kind of trajectory, right?
Yes.
Like, completely sure of himself.
Completely sure of himself. When I say he wanted to be an actor from a very young age, it's what he always wanted, and he was gonna go for it. And
it's so interesting when, because I didn't have that, but to be like a 10-year-old kid and know exactly, to have that kind of clarity, is a gift to be that clear.
Yes. It's a gift that I have often envied, actually. Like, I think I see my father and I see my brother, and they were so clear about what they wanted and where they were going. And I've always been sort of like, I don't know. Should I do this? Should I do that? And maybe that's the gift of a long life.
Yeah. That you get to, maybe they had to practice some urgency. Maybe there was some, awareness on their part. But, if you think about Brandon, he had, a long time from the time he was 8, 9, 10 to in his 20s. Like, that's a long time to be working on your craft.
No, it's true. And he was really set to be a major star. Mm-hmm. I really believe that.
Yeah. Well, I think that, the fact that to this day, fans of The Crow, I mean, and he launched, I think of that movie sometimes as like the movie that launched like, the entire goth aesthetic. Yeah. It was kind of like, here was this first kind of major motion picture and movie star who was like embodied that, but was also super sexy and leading Manny at the same time. And it's kind of like when you're in a subculture community like that, like we just had with like Black Panther, like the people of that community were like, yes, finally we are seen.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people who, identified with that culture, I think felt seen for the first time and also validated in this kind of major media kind of way.
Yeah, for sure. And that film was really critical also, from the soundtrack to the look to just, and in some ways, obviously it was also the film that ended his life. Yeah. Which was really hard. But I remember when it did come out, I went to go see it because I knew how proud he was of his performance and how excited he was to do this project. And so I thought, there's no way that I can't go and see this movie. Yeah. Even though it was a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I bet.
And I went and saw it, and he was just so phenomenal in it. And I could just see, like, he would have just catapulted from that point forward. But the one thing I do have to say that's bittersweet is that even though he was so phenomenal in the film and he touched so many people's lives, you know how there's oftentimes a film or that just you see at some certain point in your life and it touches you so and you connect with it so for so many people that film is The Crow. Yeah. And the one bittersweet part of it is that it's such a dark film. The subject matter is so dark and his character is so dark and he was so light that sometimes I wish in some ways that the fans of the film would know him and be fans of him too, which I know that they are, but that just the artistic soul, the nature-loving soul, the literary soul, the goofy, bigger than life, person that he was outside of, in addition to the fact that he was able to portray this very dark and haunting role in this film.
I think that it's probably one of the reasons why it's such an enduring piece of work, because I think it is in there. I mean, it's dark subject matter, but if somebody's playing that role just straight dark and not bringing that kind of tortured contrast where, I mean, it's kind of this, how we all feel at some point in our lives when we are trying to birth who we actually are and having all the forces of the world against us. And it's so relatable. It's kind of birth of an artist, so I understand, it is dark subject matter, but I'm not sure that a person who wasn't as sunny and positive as Brandon could have pulled it off in that way.
Yeah. Well, and also, for anybody who's ever read the comic book or the graphic book, it's very romantic and literary, and the man who wrote it, James O'Barr, and Brandon spent lots of time together. Like, Brandon would call him and talk about the character and the wording, and there are passages in the book where the Eric Draven character does these almost like soliloquies.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it did speak to that part of him, and it had a lot of heart in it.
Yeah, and that character, even though it is dark subject matter, is a romantic lead.
Yes.
In that kind of classic way. It is that tortured romantic lead. And he's so beautiful in it. Like he's incredibly beautiful to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. And he worked so hard to get in shape for that film because he saw that character as one of these sort of skinny Iggy Pop type of characters. And so he really worked hard to like cut down and get as wiry as he could and all of that. So he really went for it. Yeah. Well, I think maybe just to close out the conversation on Brandon, I'll read just one more quote of his. He was such a lover of life. He lived so fully. And as we said, he had a really strong connection with nature, and he loved to be out in nature and camping. And I have a quote of his from a camping trip that he took in Northern California, where he just wrote these lines, and he said, "Gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous. The sun is out, the sky is blue, few black clouds mar the horizon. Time passes slow up here. I will make a concerted effort to concentrate on it alone."
Beautiful, Brandon Lee.
Beautiful Brandon Lee.
So, yeah, we wanted to do this episode to honor Brandon on this anniversary of his passing, and since it was also his birthday recently in February. And we keep up social media pages for him, right?
We do. Yep.
So
on Facebook and Instagram. And
yeah, it's Brandon Lee, and we'll put links to it on our show notes. But also, as he relates to you, I think it's really wonderful for you to tell stories about your brother. Because, I mean, the two of you are the only two people in the world who know what it feels like to be the son and daughter of Bruce Lee.
Yes.
And even though he's not here with us in body anymore, it must feel like, very warm and comforting for you to kind of think about your brother and think about this kind of family connection and just share that with, everybody.
For sure. I mean, Brandon, like you said, he was the only other person who had an experience of life similar, who had to walk in shoes similar to mine. And even though we were 4 years apart in age, and so we didn't spend a lot of our adult lives near one another, we had this sort of really deep bond between us. And he died just a few weeks before his wedding, and he had asked me to be his best man. And he often, even though, we didn't spend a lot of time together because we lived in different places during our adult lives, the times we did spend together were very meaningful, and we would have real conversations and talk to each other in a real way about what was going on in our lives. And I just always knew that he was there. And I know that he still is. So.
All right. Well, Brandon, thank you for all of your artistic beauty and work that you've gifted to the world. And we celebrate you.
We do. Yeah.
So thanks for joining us for another episode of the Bruce Lee podcast. And today we honor Brandon Bruce Lee.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you later. Bye. You can find show notes on brucelee.com and follow us at Bruce Lee on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please subscribe to the Bruce Lee podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can email us or send us a short voice memo to hello@brucelee.com.
Hey everyone, this is Shannon Lee. If you are enjoying our podcast and would like to support us, you can do so by donating at brucelee.com/podcast. This podcast is really a labor of love from my heart and Sharon's heart to all of you out there. And we would really appreciate any support you would be willing to give, because it just helps keep the love flowing. So thanks so much. And again, you can donate at brucelee.com/podcast.
Be water, my friend.